Hello, this is an assessment of this Model 5 Bechstein grand piano that we've been asked to assess with a view to whether we'd like to purchase the piano or not. Now this is the old style lyre, as you can see there, made in 1885 I think. That's typical of the age of the piano. Later pianos don't have that type of lyre. This is an 1896 Bechstein that we have in stock, and that's the typical columns that you find on the pedals. And this is a Bechstein, I think this is about 1910, so again similar to the one that was made in 1896. Now the fact that it's made in 1885 doesn't necessarily mean we don't want to purchase it. Very, very similar design really to pianos made in 1900. Very little change on the frame and action and such like. We shall have a look at some differences in a minute. One difference you'll see cosmetically is that the older ones have this style of Bechstein Kaisers and Königs Berlin. By 1896 you can still have that written on it, I believe. I'm not quite sure the exact crossover point, but this is the sort of more modern Bechstein logo. And the 1910 piano has a very similar one to that. Now, the things we look at, first of all, looking at the right-hand pedal, how much wear has the piano had? Well, you can see it just sloping slightly, so at some stage it's had a reasonable amount of wear, but not excessive as you sometimes find. Now, looking at the key tops, these are ivory keys, slightly yellowed. I think the lid's been kept closed. That might be something to do with it. And they're yellowing more in the middle, which is to do with the fingers. The sweat tends to make them yellow. But all in perfect condition in terms of no chips and ivory, so that's certainly positive. This also has the desk style of the older Bechstein, the kind of fleur de lis in the middle there, and you'll see that on many Bechsteins, very similar. Now the 1896 Bechstein, this is probably more common I think on that age of piano. And then the 1910, this is a Model A, very common style for a Model A, this very nice sort of circular sunburst kind of style. The piano we're assessing has had book holders put on, which shows a musician who wanted to keep the music. It's very common for musicians to want those put on grand pianos, so obviously owned by a musician at some stage. Maybe it's been owned by a musician all the time, but book holders are very useful for grands. Not quite so much necessary for grands as they are for uprights, but they're useful to have on. If we look at the frame styling on this 1895 Bechstein, it's not that much different from later Bechsteins, as I'll show you. This is the 1896 one, and really not a huge difference. Once they designed it, they didn't really change it that much over perhaps a 20-year period. And this is 1910, so very, very little difference in the frame. So back to the 1885 Model 5 grand, which is 2 meters long, by the way. Now these tuning pins have been changed, the strings have been replaced. These are still quite small tuning pins. They've gone up a size or two, and they're reasonably tight, so that's, as we've mentioned in many other times, it's probably one of the most important things to assess: how tight are the tuning pins. Are we going to have to restring the piano? What do the strings sound like, and what's the piano sound like? So let's listen to the middle of it. And it's very echoey, and that's not because the pedal is not working. It's echoey, as we'll see if we look across here, that these dampers are holding up. And well, the ones in the middle seem to be holding too. They're very badly regulated. That one's all right, but these ones are coming off immediately, so it desperately needs regulation. But looking in the bass, we'll see that they're holding up. If you're a technician, I'm sure you already know why that's the case. You can't push them down at all. If you look inside, it's because the leads have expanded, they've oxidized, and the dampers are stuck to each other. That's relatively common for leads to oxidize, so it's not something we can't do. More important is how tight are the tuning pins, and they are reasonably tight. Let's have a look at the tone overall. And if you listen, you can still hear below that echoey sound. It's actually, the tone is all there. So it's sounding reasonable. Now the bass strings have been replaced. long time ago. I'm not sure what age this restoration was done, but you can tell they've been replaced because there's a very long gap there. Now, string makers normally don't put these much closer to the agraffes, which means you've got more of the copper sounding on the whole string, generally better tone. But these aren't too bad actually. But down there they're not as rich as they should be. If we listen to this restored one we have in stock, this is the Model 5 in stock that we sold a long time ago actually, and it went to the USA and came back again. And we've got it in stock again. Very rich, that's C. On the one we're assessing, it's reasonable but not nearly as rich. Now before we look at the mechanism on the piano, a major problem we have with taking this one into stock and making a profit on it is the casework. It's had a brushed over style, which you did get when the pianos were repolished at some stage. Was common. I'm not quite sure the exact time that was commonly done. Perhaps you can help me if you're a piano restorer, you might know. But this has been brushed over, so the veneer's hidden underneath that. There's probably a very extremely pleasant veneer underneath that. Here's the 1896 one that we have in stock, and as you can see, there is a very pleasant veneer on it. Interesting crown cut here, and generally typical rosewood. The other one's rosewood underneath that, but you can see this one has very beautiful different colours of grain, and obviously that's really important when it comes to trying to sell the piano for a profit. So we do need to either sell the other one cheaply or strip it completely and hopefully find this underneath. Now down the long side of the piano we can indeed see some very pleasant veneer, so that's what's going to be underneath. I think that's dried, that's been faded and perhaps dried out a bit, that's why it shows. But then as you go along you can see that's been covered over. So definitely a problem for us to sell for the kind of profit we need. You can see actually there's a veneer underneath here, but it's disguised by this brushstroke painting over style that they had when they repolished at some stage. It's also quite scratched, and I've got these to remove. I think they'll probably come out reasonably easily, but that's a major factor for us when we're thinking about whether to take the piano on. And the Model A next to it, by the way, has been re-veneered under the client's instruction. This is actually a restoration we're doing for a client, not a stock piano, and it's a walnut veneer, as you can see. They asked for a walnut veneer. If you've got a black piano, then this is a possibility of re-veneering it and making it a very, very handsome instrument indeed. This is a black client's restoration piano as well, and really it's very hard to French polish these. French polish is extremely difficult on black to get it right. It takes longer than a wood colour piano, and polyestering it like a modern piano is what we very often will do. This is a typical modern polyester finish, and it's ideal for black really because, as I say, it's so very, very difficult to French polish a black piano. Now, looking at the mechanics, when this piano arrived a couple of days ago, that hammer there is actually touching the frame. We'll have to push that down to get the action out. And as you can see, other hammers have moved over. That one's not hitting where it was. That one is, but that one's a long way over. You can see that one there, only hitting 2 strings. So obviously the piano's been not used for a long, long time, been sat on somewhere, and the hammer's also extremely badly out of regulation. That one does get to the string, but there's a variety. That one doesn't reach the string at all. But this is when it's not played. I'm talking about pushing the key down, and it should reach the string and set off, but doesn't even get there. And the tone is a total disaster, really. That's all to do with the hammers and being misplaced. We'll have a look at that now. Now, before we look at the rest of the piano, first of all, the dampers, we remember they were oxidised. The leads were oxidised. If we zero in there, you can see the leads are definitely very oxidised. It's not an uncommon problem we have to solve. To have to take the leads out, usually replace them, unfortunately. They've usually split the wood as well, so that's a long job, and if you have to replace the damper tray, that's a very long job. As the Bechstein tide action, which you'd expect from this age of Bechstein, has the extra screws in here. That's what you very often get on the very old ones too. Looking at the action itself, the hammers, apart from being very, very worn, I don't know if we're going to be able to just reface those or whether we have to replace them. So it's not looking very encouraging, really. I've done this earlier, actually. I've lubricated one of the hinges here, because the rest of the hinges are very, if you look at the hinges going down, that one there goes down, but these ones are very tight here, so the hinge pins are very, very tight. I think lubrication seems to have solved that, so that's one job that we can simply do. It's very common, and that's making the action feel very heavy and very varied and uneven. And as we say, when you press the hammer down, it doesn't really set off. There's the set off button there. They're not reaching the set off button, so it needs full regulation. The dampers are lifting off too early, so just it looks like more and more work for a piano that needs repolishing as well. These rollers are very, very flat, and certainly will feel a bit notchy once the regulation's been done. Normally we'd change the rollers. Hammers, shanks and rollers, as we've mentioned in many other videos, is the best thing to do. I forgot to mention the pitch of the piano. That's an A. Should be A440. Sorry, it's not very focused, that's better. It's 420, so many, many years, decades not been tuned, would be my guess, and it's very out of tune as well. So that's an assessment of a Bechstein Model 5 grand piano, 2 meters long, made in 1885, I believe, and it's been for us to assess to see if you want to purchase it or not. I think probably it's too much to do to make it economically viable to do it. It would restore extremely well, but needs a huge amount of mechanical, really ideally full restoration and repolishing, which would be very difficult to recoup the outlay on that. We do like fully restoring this model of Bechstein, and we've restored many, many in the past, so it's reluctant that we would turn it down. But I think in this case, it's just impossible to make a profit out of it. And many things we've tried to show on the video that would influence our decision. Underlying the tone is there, but you can hardly pick it out at the moment because the dampers aren't working. But I think really full restoration is the only way forward with this one. I hope that's been helpful. Thank you very much for listening.